noticed this, but throughout history, whenever someone comes up with a unique idea or a new scientific discovery, oftentimes there's a lot of resistance to that discovery. And so one of the ways that people put somebody down who's done that is to say about them, he's crazy or she's crazy. Today's gospel is one of those times where that happens. And I want to go through some things from history that demonstrate the point about how people resist change by calling people crazy. In the 6th century BC, Pythagoras declared that the world was round, and people laughed and laughed and called him crazy. And in 330 BC, Aristotle agreed with Pythagoras about that. And so the Greek philosophers were not willing to hear that either, and so they called him crazy. And it took many more centuries until the voyages of Columbus before there was widespread acceptance of the fact that the world was round and not flat. For centuries, people thought that the Earth was the center of the universe. In 1543, Copernicus came up with the model that the Earth and the planets orbited around the sun. And when he came up with that idea, church leaders and scientists called him crazy. In the early 1600s, Galileo Bruno was burned at the stake for continuing to talk about the crazy ideas that Copernicus had developed. And in 1633, Galileo was found guilty of heresy and confined to house arrest for the rest of his life. And the church leaders in the scientific community labeled him crazy and a radical for believing in the same idea. And finally, science came to the understanding that Copernicus was right. In the 17th century, William Harvey, an English physician, was the first to describe that blood circulates around the body from the heart and out to other parts of the body. Harvey was pronounced as crazy by his fellow physicians because they didn't think that he was right. They thought the brain did that. And so for many years, it took many years before mainstream medical science agreed that he was right. In 1845, Ignaz Semmelweis, a Hungarian doctor, was troubled by the fact that so many women died from infections in the hospital. And so he observed that his medical students came directly from the dissecting tables in the morgue to the maternity ward to care for the patients there without washing their hands. And so he ordered his students to start washing their hands before each examination. The results were astonishing. Within 1 month, the death rate on that unit dropped from 18% down to 1%. Now that discovery seems pretty logical to us, but news of washing people's hands didn't go over well with the rest of the doctors in Europe. Many doctors labeled that idea crazy for many, many years and were offended that some people saw them as dirty and that they couldn't believe that their uncleanliness had caused disease among their patients. And because Semmelweis never published an official report about sanitation and how it was life-saving, the medical world completely rejected him, viewing him as a crazy embarrassment for the medical establishment for the rest of his life. In 1903, many people gathered around the Wright brothers' attempt to fly an airplane out of Kitty Hawk for the first time. And people who gathered around there were taking bets up and down the beach. That thing won't fly. There's no way he can make that happen. And so they labeled the Wright brothers as crazy for even trying it. Progress with flight continued, while detractors continually referred to the early flyers as crazy. In 1911, Frederick Foch, a French general and an Allied commander during World War I, said, "Airplanes are an interesting scientific toy, but they have no military value." I think we should invite old Ferdinand to a Blue Angels presentation. He might change his mind about that. In today's gospel, then, Jesus joins that group of innovators to have dangerous ideas that should be labeled as crazy, and that's what the gospel this morning talks about. Mark has crammed a whole lot of material the first 2.5 chapters of his gospel. Before reading today's gospel, Mark records Jesus as a pretty busy fellow. He's been baptized, he's been tempted for 40 days, he wins a battle with the forces of evil, he's healed several people, he's taught with authority in the temple, he selected his disciples, he got into arguments with the temple leadership over focusing on the law over individual need. And in these acts, he demonstrated and describes the coming of the kingdom of God. The charge of madness has consistently been brought against Jesus because of his ethic about love. Nobody but a fool would love his enemies. We still hear that today. Jesus was regularly drawing conclusions that were contrary to how the world sees things. He continually points out the distinction between the ways of the world and the ways of God. God's wisdom often overthrows the world's common sense. Jesus repeatedly declares an inversion of the world's order. He emphasizes lots of radical ideas, like the first shall be last, and the last shall be first. The meek shall inherit the earth, and all people are children of God. The message that Jesus was teaching can be summed up in these simple words: love God and love your neighbor. These ideas and actions represented a radical departure from the ways of the world, and in many ways they still do. And in those terms, Jesus certainly was crazy. In Mark's story, Jesus has been doing miraculous things, and crowds were following him. Huge numbers of people were following him around. The things that he had been saying and doing were inspiring the crowds, and they responded to what he had been saying, and they wanted to hear more from him. But crowds are threatening. They're particularly threatening to constituted authority. And in order to combat the threat, authorities begin to circulate rumors. And that was no different in this case. And one of the rumors they started to circulate among the people is that Jesus is out of his mind. And when his family heard this, they went out to restrain him. His family showed up, and they want to take Jesus home, put him to bed, keep him quiet for a while, and then see if all this talk about casting out demons and the kingdom of God goes away when he settles down. Apparently, all of this Jesus talk about invisible kingdoms of God and casting out demons led members of his own family to the conclusion that he was seeing things that other people didn't see. The reason was simple: Jesus was out of his mind. Following the family betrayal, the religious authorities, represented by the scribes, also got in the act, as Mark reads this to us this morning. They were aware of what Jesus had been doing, and as a result, their authority was being threatened because the crowds were very receptive to what Jesus was saying to them. And they decided that the best way to combat their fears was to say that Jesus was doing what he did because he was in league with the devil, which is another way of saying he was crazy. Being called a disciple of the devil and crazy was meant to discredit Jesus and his work. Applying the term mad to Jesus was an attempt to discredit what he was saying and what he was doing, and to remove the threat that he posed to the religious establishment. The gospel contains the message of the kingdom of God brought to us in the person of Jesus Christ. Those who believe and see in Jesus a message of hope for the world, while many people today continue to believe that Jesus really didn't mean all this stuff about love and taking care of people and paying attention to your neighbors, that he really didn't mean what he said. The message for us is made clear in this wonderful little story told to us by a veterinarian. And he writes this for us. Being a veterinarian, I had been called to examine a 10-year-old wolfhound named Belker. The dog's owners, Ron and Lisa, and their little boy Shane, were very attached to Belker, and they were hoping for a miracle. I examined Belker and found that he was dying of cancer. And I told the family that we could do anything for the dog, and offered to perform the euthanasia procedure and come to their house to do it. As we made arrangements, Ron and Lisa told me that they thought it would be good for 6-year-old Shane to observe the procedure. This is an interesting line here. They felt as though Shane might learn something from the experience. The next day I felt the familiar catch in my throat as Belker's family surrounded him. Shane seemed so calm, petting the dog for the last time, hugging him, and saying his goodbyes. And I wondered that if he was doing that stuff, but maybe he wasn't understanding what was about to happen. Within a few minutes, Belker slipped away peacefully. The little boy seemed to accept Belker's transition without any difficulty or confusion at all. And we sat there for a while after Belker's death, wondering how sad it was that animals' lives were shorter than human lives. And Shane, who had been listening quietly to our discussion, piped up and said, "I know why." Startled, we all turned to him, and what came out of his mouth stunned me, and I've never heard a more comforting explanation. And this is what he said. People are born so that they can learn how to live a good life, learn how to care about each other and love their neighbor, and being good all the time and being nice to people. That's what they're born to do. And then the 6-year-old continued, well, dogs know all about how to do that stuff automatically, so they don't have to stay in this world as long as people do. So the next time somebody identifies you as one of those crazy Christians and you start to crack open, don't waste a moment gathering your old self up into something like you knew before. Let your new self splash like sunlight into every dark place and laugh and cry and make sounds that you never made before, and thank all that is holy for the gift, because now you have no choice but to let all your love spill out into the world.